Good evening and welcome to the February 2nd meeting of the City Council Budget Committee. My name is John Borowski. I'm the chair for the next few minutes. We are happy to have people here in the audience and anybody watching at home. We will be going over the capital improvement project as the main emphasis of our meeting tonight. But I guess the first thing that I'm going to do is move on to committee chair and vice chair elections. So I would open the floor for nominations. Andrea.
I would move that we nominate Claire Surratt for chair.
Second.
Close the nominations.
I have a drink going, otherwise I wouldn't.
Second. All right. All those in favor of Claire as chairperson, please raise your hand. Sure. Do we need to count them, or you? All right.
Close enough.
Wasn't it? All right. And nominations for vice chair.
Mr. Chair, so we need to nominate a citizen member. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And, well, I would like to nominate Shonda Miller.
Done.
Second.
Close the nominations. We're ready.
Nominations are closed. All those in favor?
No
All right.
discussion.
With that, I will pass the gavel over to the new chair and say congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to, I'm just a little chatty Cathy over here. I'd like to thank John Borowski for his dedication and all the work that he does on the Budget Committee.
Here, here.
I'd like to honor him.
All right. So just for future Shonda, just so you know, the main thing I'd be asking you for assistance with is helping me keep the queue. But I think for tonight, I can probably handle it. But when we get into our full Budget Committee meetings, just noting who's got their hands raised and making sure we don't miss anybody would be great. So, with that...
Madam Chair,
yes.
just procedural. I will be leaving about 7:15.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know. So now is we've got some time set aside for public comment. I don't know if we have anyone here this evening who'd like to offer public comment, but we have that opportunity available. We're a little ahead of what our posted schedule was, but I suspect we won't. Nobody? All right.
It's okay if you get that right.
I agree. Well, seeing no one wanting to provide public comment, we'll move on then to minutes approval. We have minutes, and we got copies of these minutes, I'm presuming?
Electronically.
It's been a while.
Electronically.
So I would entertain motions to one motion to approve the minutes for meetings from last year, which would be May 5th, May 12th, May 17th, May 19th, and May 27th.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Yeah.
Okay, and discussion?
These minutes were available electronically, and I understand the reason why in this instance, but for me personally, it helps me to be able to go over them if I'm going to approve them, if I do have the hard copies of them. And I know it was a big packet and stuff like that, so I understand this time, but in the future, if that's possible, I would appreciate it.
All right. Any other discussion on the minutes from last year?
Those were sent with which packet? Were they sent when you sent out to?
It was a link to the website.
Oh, yeah, because I like
That explains. That extra step can make it a little challenging. So, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes? 8. And any opposed?
Abstain.
1 abstention. Okay. So now we're going to turn... Sorry,
Madam Chair,
Councilor
just
Clark?
procedurally, I just want to recognize that we have the Dennis Hidgman, who's a Lane County Budget Committee member, with us tonight here.
Great.
So,
Be in here.
just in case any county questions come up.
Well, we won't put him on the spot to answer questions on behalf of the county.
He did promise me he wasn't here to ask for any money tonight.
All right.
All right, so moving on, we're already ahead of schedule. This is great. We're going to turn things over to staff to go through their presentation of the draft capital improvement program. And we're planning to take a break around 7 o'clock, so.
Thank you very much. And before I turn it over, excuse me, to Pavel, just a couple of quick comments. One, it's great to be back with this group, and we look forward to some really good discussions over the next several months as we are kicking off kind of that budget season. The last couple of years, as you know, this group has done quite a bit of hard lifting and heavy lifting, and I think landed us in some really good places and have helped financially as we've moved forward, and so we've appreciated that immensely. This year we're hoping that there won't be quite as much heavy lifting required. There will still be some opportunities to have some really good discussions about financially where we're headed into the future, and for this group to weigh in on some, I think, some important topics. And so we look forward to that also. And just as we do move through into the budget season, just again, if any of you individually have questions or comments or information needs, please feel free to contact our budget office, either Sue or Mia Carriaga, and we'll make sure you get all the information you need to make sure that you can make the decisions that you need to make for this community. And so I just want to thank you ahead of time for all the work that I know you'll be doing. And we'll kick this off with Pavel.
Pavel Gubanikin, City of Eugene Finance Division. Tonight the city staff are presenting for your consideration the Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, for fiscal years 2012 through 2017. The projects that are included in the CIP fall primarily into several categories. We tend to define capital projects as acquisition of property, such as parkland acquisition, construction of new facilities, or rehabilitation and renovation of existing facilities that either extends the useful life of the asset or enhances the usability or capacity of that facility. So those are the types of projects that you will see in the CIP. Wherever appropriate, the staff also documented the operating budget impact of capital projects. For example, if a new facility comes online and there are additional operating expenses associated with that, we try to capture that impact as well. But you will not see in this document any other operating costs or unfunded operating items that are not capital in nature. There are three primary goals of the CIP. The first one is to project the revenues that are available over the next 6-year period to fund the capital projects and provide a balanced program where revenues balance expenditures for capital improvements. Secondly, it's to show the unmet capital needs. In addition to projects for which funding has been either secured or identified, we also include projects where no funding source has been identified, but projects that are quantifiable and real, for which we currently don't have the funding. And finally, the CIP, which is approved by the City Council every other year, serves as the basis for preparing the capital budget for the next 2 years. And as the Budget Committee, you will see the capital budget for the next fiscal year 2012, that will be based on this CIP. The projects that are included in this document come from a great variety of sources, and in fact there are 7 pages, I think it's pages 9 through 16 in this document, that document various city plans, policies, and other sources of information where these projects come from. We also, wherever appropriate, try to document any prior opportunity for public input, instances where public had a chance to provide input into these plans and policies. And a lot of these projects have already gone through some form of public input when corresponding plans and policies were reviewed and adopted. And by the way, as a just housekeeping note, we do have extra copies of the CIP document, so if you don't have a hard copy and you would like to refer to one, just let me know. We do have extras. As I mentioned, there are several types of projects that are included in this document. Funding secured are the projects where we have either received the revenue or we're pretty close to 100% sure that the revenue will be received. Funding identified are the projects where there is a pretty high probability of getting the revenue, and finally funding not identified is where we really don't know where the revenue would come from. One change from the prior capital improvement program is that we do not have so-called placeholder projects. In the past, we used to have projects that we used to call placeholders, where the cost was not really quantified, and we didn't have a solid cost estimates. We do not have that in the current CIP. And probably one prominent project that you will not see in this document is the City Hall replacement that fell into that category of placeholder projects. Just to give a sense of scale as to how much money we're talking about over a 6-year period, it's about $314 million, with roughly half of the projects falling into funded category and a little bit over half into funding not identified category. I'm not going to go over in great detail over the various funding sources for funded CIP projects. I think the main point of the slide is to show that A, there is a lot of different revenue sources from which the funding comes from, and B, the vast majority of these sources are restricted in terms of which projects the money can be used for. As you can see, the only truly unrestricted portion of the CIP is the General Capital Fund, and that represents a fairly small portion of the total funded projects, 23 million out of 152 million. CIP projects are divided into 6 functional categories, and tonight's presentation will follow the same sequence. The 2 biggest categories that are roughly equal to each other are airport and transportation categories. In transportation, really the biggest chunk is the pavement preservation program, which is almost $42 million out of this 46.9. And in the airport category, there's a variety of projects. The biggest one, probably the terminal building expansion at $16 million. To talk a little bit about the timeline, the things that have happened so far and the next steps in the process. The draft CIP document was distributed to the Budget Committee in mid-January. The city staff have also made an effort to reach out to the community and to let interested city residents know about the proposed draft CIP. An electronic copy of the document was sent to the budget interested parties email list, which is the email list that we maintain of citizens that are interested in budget-related issues. It was also sent to the chairs and co-chairs of the city's neighborhood association and the members of the Neighbors Leaders Council to let them know, because a number of projects in the CIP are neighborhood-specific and are identified as such on the CIP project pages. So we do want to make sure that residents and neighborhood leaders can comment on the CIP. The next steps after the Budget Committee formulates its recommendation to the City Council on the CIP are the City Council public hearing, which is going to be on the February 22nd. That would be the next opportunity for the public to come and provide their feedback. And between now and then, we will probably make another public outreach. It probably will again be electronic, where we will communicate neighborhood-specific projects to the neighborhood associations and invite them to comment on the CIP before the City Council. And currently the CIP is scheduled for adoption on the February 28th. The reason for this kind of accelerated timeline is that because CIP becomes the basis for next year's capital budget, we do need to have an approved CIP before staff can finalize capital budget for fiscal year 2012 and bring it to the staff as part of the proposed budget. And that concludes my portion of this presentation. Mark Schoening, the city engineer, will cover the public works portion of the CIP. Thank you.
What do you want to do, Cliff?
So I was going to suggest that we hear from the full presentation and then have questions and discussion, unless there's something very confusing and you really would like clarity right then. Then just raise your hand.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully I won't be part of that confusion.
Super confusing. That would not be good.
So my name is Mark Schoening. I'm going to cover the 5 Public Works Managed program areas of the 6-year CIP, including airport, parks and open space, transportation, stormwater, and wastewater. And so for each, the format is for each section, I'll go through the kind of the funding sources, the programs and policies from which the projects are derived, and then some highlights of each of those program areas. And so from the airport, as you can see, the majority of the funds come from the Federal Aviation Administration, with additional funds from some of the facility charges. And the sources of the project are the primarily Airport Master Plan Update, which was just updated this past year, and the FAA 5-year Capital Improvement Program. And those provide the source of the projects, and the Airport Advisory Committee really provides the policy and the citizen input to guide the development of the airport portion of the CIP. And in the 6-year capital improvement program, the early years are focused more on preservation and rehabilitation of existing facilities and pavements, and then the later years are more focused on some of the capacity enhancements to the airport. And this has been the case with every CIP, because it's really following the increase in enplanements before making decisions on expanding the capacity of the airport. So this diagram is also one that we've shown, or this chart is one that we've shown with each CIP, and this shows the total enplanements, and you can see the effects of both 9/11 and then the recession in 2007. So from 2009 to 2010, we saw about a 7% increase in enplanements. We almost got back to the pre-recession levels of 2007. If the Beavers had made a bowl game, we probably would have made it. Sorry, Kurt.
And for those who might not know, enplanements means how many people got on the plane. It's just a way to measure how much activity there is at the airport.
And then since the last update of several of the CIP, several major projects have been completed, including the new airport rescue and firefighting facility that was relocated to the north end of the airport. It improved response times to both runways, the main runway and the parallel runway. And then this is a picture of a project last June that went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the month of June. It was the rehabilitation of the main runway. And just to give you a sense of some of the numbers, that was 97,000 cubic yards of rock, 60,000 tons of asphalt, and 135,000 square feet of pavement markings, all in 1 month. So then moving on to parks and open space, the funding sources are varied for parks and open space, but the primary source is parks SDCs, even though we've seen a dramatic decline in SDC revenues across all of the systems with the recession and the significant drop in building permit activity. These are the parks and open space plans and policies that guide the capital improvement program, with most of the projects coming out of the PROS project and priority plan. And due to the increasing gap in between available operation and maintenance funding and the inventory of parks, the capital improvement program is really focused on acquisition and renovation of existing park facilities. So, and this isn't it's better with the lights lower, but this is a nice view along the Ridgeline Trail in South Eugene, where we've made some recent acquisitions. And then this is a renovation of the irrigation system in Alton Baker Park to provide for better turf to accommodate some of the larger events there that provide a beating on the turf, so it allows for a faster recovery, the better irrigation system. Stormwater, the major source of funds are stormwater utility fees, a little bit from stormwater SDCs and the Wetland Mitigation Bank. And these are the plans and policies that guide the stormwater capital program. The underlying policies are found in the Comprehensive Stormwater Management Plan, which really moved the program several years ago to one that focused primarily on flood control, that one that tries to balance flood control, water quality enhancement or improvement in preservation, and natural resource enhancement. And so the focus of the CIP are on rehabilitation of the existing stormwater system, and that's being driven primarily by the pavement preservation program. So we're trying to, on both stormwater and wastewater, as with Webb on Waterline and Northwest Natural Line Gas, are getting that work done ahead of paving projects, but it tends to drive the capital programs for all four of those utilities. The other areas of focus are on stream bank protection and stabilization along the Amazon, and then water quality projects throughout the city, with a focus on underground decommissioning underground injection control facilities, which is a regulatory term for facilities that infiltrate stormwater into the ground in the areas of the city that are highly pervious. So under the Safe Drinking Water Act, DEQ, and we're in the process of us and several other jurisdictions of receiving a permit to manage our underground injection control systems to protect groundwater as a drinking water source. So that's under the Federal Clean Water Act. And the issue is that the pollutants in stormwater in the areas of the city, primarily in River Road and Santa Clara, the groundwater is very shallow, the soils are very pervious, so there's a direct connection in many instances between the stormwater that's infiltrated and the groundwater. That's a resource that the state and the federal government are trying to protect. So that's a significant driver of the capital improvement program over the next 6 years of the CIP, and probably 10 years in looking at the permit program. It's probably going to be a 10-year, $1 million a year program, again primarily focused in River Road and Santa Clara, but we also have these types of facilities in the Harlow neighborhood and some other areas where in the past we've had pervious, or we do have pervious soils, and in the past it was the method of disposing of stormwater. So that'll have impacts to stormwater rates as we move forward into fiscal year 12. Okay. And this is an example of a stormwater project that Delta Ponds that balances and has all three elements of water quality protection, natural resource enhancement, and flood control. And it's been a multi-year project that's, we're coming into the last phases this coming summer. See if there's a magic number of clicks before it moves. Okay. Transportation is probably the most complicated and varied of the program areas, with a wide variety of funding sources, and as Pablo mentioned, the major focus is on pavement preservation with the $35.9 million pavement bond measure that we've implemented 2 years of, and the 5-cent local gas tax that provides $3.5 million a year for capital pavement preservation. The transportation SDC, since we developed the CIP, the draft CIP, we've kind of relooked at the revenue projections and have scaled those back from $650,000 in the first year of the CIP to $300,000 to more accurately reflect what we think is going to happen over the next year. So what that's resulted in is we've reduced some of the program areas, such as traffic signal improvements and traffic operations. We've kept the Jefferson Acre project, so that's unchanged. That'll be our first local improvement district with a new assessment code in place. And then another project is the Alder Street Bikeway bike improvement project. We were able to move that project more quickly with local funds, which that we had that were appropriated but not used for other projects. So that project's going to move forward in advance of the state funding, which is the $707,000 you see on the top right there. So that difference between the draft CIP and will be reconciled with the capital budget as that moves forward, and it's just specific to the, in this instance, the transportation SDCs. In the document, there's a number of shared use paths that are both, some are funded and some are unfunded, and we've included all those projects, all the unfunded ones in, because they've been projects that are either in play now for grants, either federal or state, or they were projects that we've previously identified for grant funding and were unsuccessful but may go forward again. And so that's been a big change since beginning with the last CIP, is that we've become more, there have been more opportunities and we've become more successful in getting bicycle and pedestrian facilities funded through grants. The state has several new programs, and the federal government's, the Transportation Enhancement Program, has been ongoing for several years, and we've been pretty successful in securing those types of grants. Though on the flip side, the federal earmarks look like they won't be a good source for the near term for some of the bike and pedestrian projects. There's also significant changes happening on the plans and policies since the last capital improvement program was adopted. The Trans Plan, or the Transportation System Plan, is being updated over a several-year time period, and that will be the policies and projects in that document will be influenced by the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan, which is being updated right now, and the Climate and Energy Action Plan, and also Envision Eugene. So that'll drive some of the policies and projects that come out of the update of the Transportation System Plan. I mentioned that we're updating the bicycle, or the Pedestrian and Bicycle Master Plan, and I think that'll generate a whole new set of projects to be considered. And then a program area that we've included in several capital improvement programs has been traffic calming, and we've kind of renamed that because traffic calming is really focused on neighborhood livability, and there's a lot of different elements of transportation that can enhance neighborhood livability, whether it's a sidewalk infill project or an access ramp, a handicap ramp at an intersection, is that we've renamed that and then broadened the scope of that program and calling it neighborhood transportation livability. So it would have a broader focus and focused on local streets within neighborhoods. This is an example of a paving project on 18th that was funded with the pavement bond measure. So this is a process, it's called full depth reclamation or in-place recycling. So it's something that we've tried recently, and we've had folks from many of our peers from the Willamette Valley come down and observe this construction. So it's where we're using a lot of the materials in place. So it's been a way to reconstruct a street for less money and using less materials, both bringing new materials in, we're doing less of that, and taking fewer materials away, because the subgrade and the base rock are mixed in a process like rototilling with cement, and creates a very strong base. So that material, instead of being hauled off, is used in place. So that's allowed us to do a little bit more with the pavement preservation money that we've had. Moving on to wastewater, again, this is another program that's primarily funded, similar to stormwater, funded by user fees with a small amount of system development charges as well. And the two documents that really drive the the projects or the master plan, and more importantly, the wet weather flow management plan. So that's a plan that identifies projects to reduce the amount of surface water that inflows and the amount of groundwater that infiltrates into the pipe system, so that we regain capacity in the pipe system, and we also deliver a lower amount of flow to the regional pollution control facility. And this is a picture of a wastewater rehabilitation project. So they're essentially pulling a resin-impregnated sock through a pipe, and then it's cured in place with hot water that's circulated through it, and what you end up with is a new pipe inside the old pipe. The diameter's a little bit smaller, but it's a much smoother surface and a lot less groundwater, so we actually gain capacity in the system through this type of project. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike Penwell from Facilities.
Good evening, everyone. Well, the public buildings and facilities is a lot simpler than public works, so I'll get through it pretty quickly. By far the biggest part of the pie here for public buildings and facilities is the general capital projects that we manage over in facilities. There's also a sizable chunk for parking, and then the other are the various funds that have some involvement with public buildings and facilities. The plans and policies that are used, the facility condition report is sort of the basis for the general fund capital budget that identifies the condition of all of our general fund facilities. We recently completed conversion to a new facility condition report software that is forward-looking and predictive rather than sort of backward-looking based on analysis of every square inch of every building. So it's much more efficient, and about 95% is accurate, and actually much more accurate looking forward in terms of capital planning. And then a variety of other documents that inform the various decisions made around public buildings and facilities. Most of you have heard me talk about the 2 to 4% replacement value as being the industry target for funding of preservation and maintenance and major maintenance. This graph represents historically since FY4. You'll see the red bars are 2% of the replacement value of city facilities, and then the blue bar represents funding during that time. And while generally funding has increased, it's fallen behind the rise in replacement value over that time, and so we've gotten quite a bit farther behind over time, even though the base funding levels have increased. And then some of the reductions in FY9, 10, and 11 have to do with reducing the $900,000 year-end that goes into the capital budget as well. You'll recall for FY11, $300,000 was allocated toward the Creekside Park development, and so the remaining $600,000 then went into the capital transfer. This highlights one of our major problem areas and one of the places that we're getting behind, and that's in aquatics with our pool facilities. This is the diving tank at Sheldon Pool, and highlights a couple of things. One, the painting of the surface that has to be done periodically to preserve the surface. There are synthetic terrazzos that are available now that can be applied, but it's a fairly expensive process, but it gives a lot longer life. And then in this particular case, you can see the water supply piping is on the surface of the bottom of the pool. That's because the 35-year-old pipes failed a few years ago, and we were actually pumping more water into the ground than we were into the pool, and so we replaced that with some surface mounted, but it's going to be probably $750,000 to properly replace all the supply piping at this pool alone. And Echo Hollow Pool is in a little better shape, but it's not far behind. Echo Hollow has its own unique problems with the last remaining pneumatic bulkhead in the world that we know of. And we finally convinced Aquatics not to raise and lower it anymore, but just to leave it in place, because it's an adventure every time we move it, and we never know if that's going to be the last time and it's going to be stuck. So, and both of our indoor pools are approaching 40 years old, and the tanks themselves are still in relatively good shape, but it's just, it's expensive to operate and maintain pools, and they need periodic capital reinvestment, and these are due. As you recall, we passed a bond measure for Amazon Pool, and so got that up to snuff, increased the size of the tank, improved the facilities, and so on, and that may be the eventual funding strategies for our other pools. Bit of good news, it's been in the media a lot lately, which has cost me donuts for my coworkers on a regular basis. The police facility that we acquired over on Country Club Road, we're into design now, and we're off and running with the project. It's very exciting. We've got a tight budget, but it's a great deal for the community and for the police department. We'll get them in a safe, adequate building, and for half the cost of what a new building would have cost. And that's slated for completion about a year from now. The Holt Center, I'm showing that because that's an example of a building that's reached a certain age and then starts to require a lot of capital reinvestment. In the first part of the 2000s, kind of into the middle part of the 2000s, we put probably $5 or $6 million into the building, and then we've got some other projects that we're continuing to look at. All the lobby lighting needs to be redone at a certain point, and we have a project that's underway that's looking at that. But keeping our facilities in good shape over time. One thing I did want to mention about the police facility as well is that this building was built in 1982, so it's coming up on 30 years old, and so we'll remodel it, occupy it, but it's still going to be a building that's going to require some regular capital reinvestment right off the bat. A lot of new buildings, you do get a little hiatus, like with the library, 8 or 10 years or so before you have to start putting much in terms of capital. But it's still obviously a very good deal in terms of being ahead on that. And that concludes my portion as well.
All right. That's the end of our staff presentation. Okay. So we'll open it up for questions and discussion. We will use the clock just to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, but considering that we're fairly ahead of schedule, I feel confident everyone should get their opportunity. So questions, comments? I can start a queue. Councilor Farr?
A question, I think, Pavel, possibly for you. From your presentation on the CIP funding source regarding the placeholder that was there for City Hall that no longer is there, there is what is it, $6 billion in reserve for that? $7 million in reserve for City. Where is that listed?
So we have the facility reserve fund, so the remaining $6 million is still in the facility reserve fund set aside.
And isn't listed out anyplace else, just in the facility reserve?
Right.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. And then I'll come back to my next question.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. John?
Okay, I've got a bunch of questions, so we'll just get started. I'll probably take a couple of rounds, but first question is on 300 Country Club Road, and you might be able to answer this. Have we looked into the possibility of using telecom funds using some of the telecom funds for the telecommunication infrastructure in that building?
I think Christine.
Yeah, bring Mike up because I got a bunch for him.
Since I'm the project manager on that one, I can handle that one. We just recently got approval to use funds for running the fiber line out to there, and that's estimated $300,000 investment. So that's a sum that doesn't have to come out of the established project budget. And then we're also going to look at the infrastructure within the building too, and see if that meets the requirements. And so we'll look at that as an possible FY12 telecom project as well.
Good.
And that's the standard procedure for most building kinds of projects, is to use those kinds of funds for those kinds of uses.
Right, and that's what I would encourage, because telecom funds are so limited that when we have an opportunity, let's look for that opportunity. So I guess I'm going to go into general facilities maintenance. This is one of my areas that I have issues with, the amount of money that we're dedicating to general maintenance of our facilities. And I want to say thanks to Meredith, because I've been on the phone with Meredith for the last few days trying to get some of the reports. I got the facility condition report and was digging through that. And I can't get my numbers to match yours, so that's where I've got some problems or some questions. So on page 113, it gives us that we have $329 million worth of assets. And so 2% of that is approximately $5.7 million of what we should be spending. But I don't see on the next page there, I only see us spending 3.8.
And 6 point.
Yes, or 6.6, I'm sorry. And you say we're 2.4 million off. So the numbers just didn't quite add up to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated because that 2 to 4% industry standard is a combination of preservation and maintenance capital money and major maintenance money. And so you're only seeing the capital money, and even within that, it's a bit complicated because we have 4 different preservation and maintenance funds: the health, safety, welfare, primary building systems, secondary building systems, and the mechanical and electrical systems, service systems. Then we've also got some that aren't preservation and maintenance. They're more discretionary. There's the B1 funding category that is for improvements to facilities based on changing program needs or a safety issue or something that's above and beyond. So we're not preserving and maintaining existing. We're doing work that actually improves in order to make the facility more suited to its current use and operation and so on. There's also the B2 category, which is the ADA funding, and so that's not preservation and maintenance either. That's additions or improvements to the building. And so you have to take the A categories, add to that the major maintenance function that comes out of the maintenance budget, add those together, and that's what you're comparing to the 2%.
Okay.
And Pavel's done those calculations, and all I can say is they're complicated. I've reviewed them, and they do match up, but we would have to give you more information to see how that works.
Again, that's why I was digging a little bit. And then this was in the back of the FCI report.
Right.
Can you explain to me the spike in 2012, please, and to the other people?
Sure.
You might just explain what the report is.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the report is actually has to do with deficiencies that are predicted in future years. There's a spike at 2012, and the reason for that is because when the program we use now was a deliverable from the assessment process that was done in 2008. The assessment process sent surveyors out into the field to look at all of our facilities and to mark down when things should be due on a predicted basis for capital reinvestment. They found that a lot of the things that should have been due in 2008 when they made the assessment actually weren't ready for capital reinvestment yet because we've taken good care of it and that sort of thing. So most of that stuff they pushed off and said, let's push it off for 4 years and we'll take another look at it then. And so a lot of stuff got piled up in 2012. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come due 2012. That just means with the new system, those are the things we focus on to go take a look at to see if they are ready. Some of those things will be, and then we'll assess whether it's time, whether we're going to spend money on it or not. Some of those things will be just fine, and we'll push them off for another 4 or 5 years. And so it's kind of an artificial spike, actually, that's a leftover residual from the assessment process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and thanks. And the reason I brought it up, I mean, it was like a $20 million spike. It went from $7 million to $34 million. So when I see a spike like that, it kind of, I need an explanation.
Right. Well, and one other important factor on that, too, is that those are predictive assessments that if you wanted to keep every building in like-new, perfect condition. And so the figures are actually much higher than the 2% figure of the replacement value. 2% is really, okay, what's practical, realistic in the real world, because not everything's going to be shiny, brand new every year. So
I put Councilor Farr back in the queue.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. That was quicker than I thought. Just a question regarding airport funding, the capital funds of the airport. Just for clarity, one of these questions is going to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The funding is predominantly federally from federal sources. Is that money comes directly from federal sources, from FAA, directly to the city of Eugene? There's no pass-through on that. It doesn't go through any.
No, it comes directly to the city.
And can you tell me which ward the airport is in?
Ward 9.
And how many members of the budget? Thank you. Could you tell me which ward the airport is in? It's in Ward 6. And how many members of the budget committee are from Ward 6?
That would be none.
Okay, thank you.
And just to remind you all, I actually happen to serve on the Airport Advisory Committee, not because I'm a member of this committee, but because I used to be a flight instructor at Lane Community College, so I've flown in and out of the airport a number of times for a couple of years. So if you have questions about that process, so we do get updates on, and things go past us for recommendations. So there are citizen eyes on that airport on a regular basis. Anything else? Okay. Mary Ann?
Yes, we talked about, it's clear that in some ways our maintenance of facilities seem to be less than needed. And what did you mean when you said, the other person was here, ready, that they weren't ready to be done? I wasn't sure what you meant by that.
Okay, good question. There's differentiation between maintenance, just ongoing maintenance, versus capital preservation and maintenance, which I would describe as sort of fixing something when it's broken of a more major scale. So
What's the other then, regular maintenance?
Regular maintenance, it can be anywhere from the custodial maintenance that we do on a daily basis. It can be smaller scale repainting, just the more ongoing, all of our preventive maintenance, like changing belts and filters and so on before they fail on a regular schedule. So when I say something's not ready yet to be replaced or repaired, that's a capital function. So in other words, a roof that has an estimated 20-year life, we go and look at it, and lo and behold, it's still got some life left in it. So rather than using that 20-year time span, we'll reset the date on that and push it out another 4 or 5 years, whatever we think, and then that'll tell us in 4 or 5 years to go back and look at it again, and by then it probably will be ready.
Are there some maintenance needs that are ready, that we pushed, it seemed like in former budget meetings, we pushed aside ones that were ready.
Well,
in order to have enough to operate.
Right, and again, I'll differentiate between ongoing maintenance and capital preservation and maintenance. we're able to hold our own in terms of ongoing maintenance of our facilities.
That's in our regular budget.
That's in our regular budget, correct.
But when we didn't do something, because we said that can't wait, I understand that, but is there any in this budget places where we did not fix things that really did need fixing?
Well, I showed a slide of one, the water supply piping at Sheldon Pool.
Yeah.
It needed to be fixed 3 or 4 years ago, and we've had to put it off because it's too expensive and there's other capital needs right now.
I think
So
City
you
Hall,
have to prioritize which other capital needs are worse or better or whatever. I'm trying to get because I sent out, I just asked some general questions. This whole difference between preservation, regular maintenance, and major maintenance, like a new roof or pipe work thing, it's going to cost a lot more. It feels like we're falling behind on that,
That's correct.
and that there's a plan somehow to put something aside in your budget to take care of that. You have one. I thought there was one plan to do with that.
yes, the answer is that there is not enough money to do all the maintenance that really needs to be done. City Hall is probably a good example of that, as good as any. A couple of months ago, we made a presentation to the City Council that talked about parks, recreation, and facilities, and talked about the needs and really the gap in capital funding for all of those. And there was conversation also about the ongoing operations and maintenance gap that's a part of that. And so the discussion around how to close that gap is an absolutely critical discussion, and it may be one of those that, as the Budget Committee and the Council move forward over the next many months, we'll want to have more conversation around that. But similar to the road maintenance discussion over the last many years, in which now we're moving forward to close the gap, we need to also figure out how to close the gap on some of these other types of infrastructures.
Yeah, because you have these categories, and I put out a notice, I have some copies, there were some questions on what we need to do about that, because, can we really live within our means? We seem to in our cabinet budget, like bought a new police station, it's going to cost, and I also think we're going to have to spend money. I didn't know we would have to do seismic repair. I thought one of the selling points was that it was already earthquake safe. That was bandied about, at least in various meetings I went.
And with respect to that, there was always a need to seismically upgrade 300 Country Club, but it's significantly less than seismically upgrading the current City Hall.
That was a point.
So, if you want to go back in the queue, Mary Ann, come back if you have more questions.
Yeah, we can come back when we get there.
Okay, so John and then Mike.
Which one do I want to go first? Pavel or Finance? When building this CIP on the funding identified projects, did you count the $900,000 transfer from the marginal beginning working capital in your base?
That's correct.
Okay. Again, this is something that I've had issues with for 5 years now. I think that if we're assuming that $900,000 is there when you approve this, it should be in your presentation in April. That's just an observation that I make. Otherwise, if you want to keep continuing doing it the way that you want, maybe it's that $900,000 slides to funding identified or funding, a little bit squishier, but it just doesn't seem like the industry standard way of doing things to me. Second thing, and I'm going to say, and this is me as a citizen who doesn't know anything about the budget process. Okay, I went through here and I looked at the airport, and I do know about it. So I knew who to call, and I knew who to ask the question of, and what. One of the capital projects for the airport is a new car wash. And it's to wash the rental cars. And it's paid for out of fees that people pay. But, where did the page go that I had it? It's a $1.8 million, or a $1.6 million car wash. Yeah, 2 years, $800,000 this year, and $1.4 or $1.6 million next year. So as a citizen, I'm looking at it and going, 1.6, and I called, and there's more to it. You know, they're relocating things, and they're doing this and doing that. But as a citizen, I look at it and I go, that's a lot of money to wash rental cars. And they changed the fees from $2 per car to $3 a car. Well,
That the rental place pays.
you know, it's just something that stuck out for me, and I don't know what the answer to it is. But if you look at it, I'll find the page that it's on and tell you. But
So if I might, I could actually speak to that particular issue. So that was actually a project that was presented to the rental car agencies themselves. It's part of a redesign of the parking lot and where long-term and short-term parking is, to move where they currently clean cars, which I believe is not as environmentally sound as it could be if we build this new facility. So the rental cars agreed to have this additional fee, so when you rent a car at the airport, there's an additional $4 fee, is that what you said?
went from 2 to 3.
$3 fee that goes specifically to build this car wash. So it's not money that would be collected for any other purpose except for that. So it's part of an overall strategy for improving that parking area and improve services out there at the airport.
I was wrong. It was 2.7 million.
Your math again.
So I don't know if Mark wants to add anything.
More than I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So could I just ask,
Go ahead, Eugene.
so then that money will come back to us? Or will it go, does it go off?
The fees collected to go to pay to build the car
Okay.
wash. And that's all, that's the reason it was collected, and that's what it'll be used for.
So I'm
At
going,
$3 a whack?
In 2015.
So unless
And
I-
actually, the
I'm
project
not
had to be put off because with the dip and the recession, rental cars weren't being used
So
as much.
at
so it took
800,000
longer to collect
cars,
that.
we'll get that paid off, right?
I'm not doing math this evening.
And there's already a car wash out there.
So I think it's still John's turn.
Well, I beat.
You did, okay. So, Mike.
It's going to be a wash.
Thank you. That's
I've
interesting.
got you in the queue, Marion.
no, I'm on the car wash. Got it.
Well, we'll come back to it.
But, you know, maybe, and maybe Mark, you can weigh in a little bit.
My questions are for Mark, so he might as well.
But I don't want to leave the impression, my understanding is, just from your description, Claire, that the rental car agencies want this service, they want this out there. What we're doing is helping facilitate that for them. They agreed to the way to best pay for that is the charge on rental cars in order to pay for that. So I just want to not leave the impression that we're out there building a project that feels pretty expensive, wondering how that's going to get paid for. We're responding to a request from a customer base, an important customer base out at the airport.
And it's fully recouped by 2015.
And it's fully recouped, not by general taxpayer dollars at all. It's paid for by those that benefit from the car wash.
Yeah,
So.
that's correct. Councilor Clark.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for coming up here. The other day, we had a broader conversation around Envision Eugene, and apparently I dipped down a little bit lower than the 30,000 feet to hit on something that you brought up here just a little bit ago, and I want to pursue it a little more in depth and get a couple more answers if I could. You term it in here, underground injection control, water pollution control facility permit. What folks out there call it, unless I miss my guess, is dry wells.
That's correct.
Right? Okay, so the context, I don't know if you were told about that particular part of the conversation the other day, but the context I brought it up in is I think the city acquired kind of a long-term liability in when we, what's the word, when we annexed streets in that area that were not built to a city standard, but were built to a county standard, and now we have this backlog of roads not up to the appropriate city standard that we have to deal with. And I'm wondering what our long-term liability is with the issue of dry wells out there compared to the plan to take care of them, to fill them in, to look at other ways to deal with stormwater in the area. What I heard you say just a little bit ago was looking for permits that would essentially negate our necessity to follow the new DEQ standards, or would at least give us some flexibility. Could you help me understand that better?
Well, the permit is for the city of Eugene and other agencies, and eventually Lane County, because they have probably as much of a backlog of dry wells in that area as we do. So we'll be permitted through the state to manage our dry wells, but in our case, because the separation between the bottom of the dry wells and groundwater is either non-existent or nominal, that we're going to end up decommissioning or taking all of those dry wells offline. So that's the $10 million capital program that we identified as part of the River Road Santa Clara Basin, and then in a few other basins in the city. So,
what's the time horizon on that $10 million plan?
Well, it's part of the permit negotiation, but we anticipate that'll be over the next 10 years.
That we'll actively work to, forgive me, we don't have as robust a stormwater system in the area, so does that 10 million take into account then what we'll be doing with stormwater instead of the dry wells, or is that just to take care of the dry wells?
It's decommissioning the dry well, which is really a small part of it. It's putting in the replacement system that will be more expensive. So in some areas, we'll be able to extend the pipe system that's in the area, stormwater pipes, and others it'll be more surface infiltration through rain gardens, so similar to what we built up in the Crest Drive neighborhood. Those were more to treat water quality, and in River Road Santa Clara it'll be more to infiltrate groundwater, but more at the surface level, so that there's some that soil media between the bottom of the, or near the surface down to the groundwater, will filter the stormwater, and that's a permissible method of infiltration.
And what are we doing to plan for the long-term acquisition of those that are privately owned or county-owned that will eventually, at one point and someday in the future, be a city responsibility?
Well, the intent is not to acquire any privately owned facilities. That'll be the responsibility of individual property owners. And the intent is to have the county, they'll get their own permit. They're a little bit behind us in that, and they'll be responsible for decommissioning their dry wells. So several years ago, I think the last time that we transferred jurisdictions of roads from the county to the city, we excluded any roads that were served by dry wells. We told the county, because of this impending permit activity, even though we have this agreement to accept jurisdiction, until that issue is addressed, we're not going to take roads from the county that are served by dry wells. And so we'll take care of those that are our responsibility, and anticipate that the county will address theirs as part of their permit.
Yeah, I suggest, I know I only have 2 seconds, but I suggest that may be a difficulty in their current financial state for them. Thank you.
Shanda?
Thank you. I was wondering if someone could explain system development charges. It looks like those are associated with parks, stormwater, wastewater, and transportation.
Right. Those are they're also, historically they're called impact fees. So when new development occurs, the idea is that that development puts a demand on the capacity of city infrastructure. And so there's two components of it. There's a reimbursement fee. So if we've developed a system with excess capacity, then the new development buys into the system. And then there's an improvement fee that if there isn't capacity, that new development pays a portion of future capital improvements.
So this is primarily development, housing development,
Right.
or commercial?
So it's paid when a building permit is secured. And then in areas that are already developed, there's credits that can be retained for the new use. So if someone redevelops a property, they get credit. They're not paying an SDC each time that property redevelops. They pay it once, and then that credit carries forward as that property redevelops. So they're not paying it a second time.
Thank you.
Anything else, Shonda?
No.
Mary Ann, you're back in.
Back to the car wash, just clearly, I would assume that the person who rents the car is eventually going to pay that, because car wash, we're going to facilitate a business, which is like any others, of course, that's going to get clean cars for the new people who go in expect a clean car, but they really don't care what happens to the old one and whether it gets washed or not. And so, well, whether that'll work or not, I don't know, but car rental has come down in price, and gas goes up. But anyway, it's just a question that it's no freebie. Somebody's going to pay, and it's probably going to be the consumer that rents a car. One thing I'm concerned about is garages, the city-owned garages. I've never figured out from the various meetings we've had what the source of funding of regular maintenance, need for change, change on the system parking. There's all these lots that are empty a lot during the day, and they're not being used, I guess. And so I would like somebody to address parking, to straighten me out.
There used to be meters, I
Well,
guess.
what funds it, what's needed, what's regular maintenance, they didn't paint it apparently, various other things. So just whatever one of the people here to help us explain to us, tell me a little bit more about garages.
We'll have Scott Llewell.
I saw everyone.
He's ready here to talk about garages. As they say in Canada, garage.
Just want you up here, though.
Thank you. Scott Llewell, Planning Development Department. The revenues that are generated in the parking garages, so it'd be monthly permits, daily fees, basically go into the parking funds, and then the parking funds pay for all costs associated with the parking garages.
Does that include major upkeep? It looks like there were some major things that were being done.
Yes.
No money comes from the general fund for that.
No.
And how much do the fees charge for parking? What percentage does that pay for?
50%.
Where does the money come from?
It's,
From the parking fees?
yes. So the only exception to that is in the bottom of some of the garages are commercial space, and we generate lease revenue there. So that's it's not a parking, but it is part of the parking fund system.
So would you say the parking fund system is then stable, except for these repairs which are taken care of by fees?
I would say that.
Mike?
It will be as soon as we lose some more meters down there.
The parking fund is one of the funds that we are reviewing and taking a look at, that we are wanting to ensure the long-term financial stability of that fund. That fund, like several of our other funds over the years, is not sustainable at its current pace, and so, but we're looking at that very hard.
Is something we're looking at? Another question.
Hold on, Mary Ann, I think your time's come, so,
my time up?
yep, I'm afraid so. I can put you back in the queue.
Okay.
I'm going to allow Councilor Farr to go next, since he's going to have to leave, so.
Thank you.
And then you.
Regarding SDCs, good question, because even the people who pay them are pretty confused by them. And my question is regarding parks and open space SDCs. Just a clarification, it looks like on the capital improvements, a little more than half of that's coming from SDCs. And just to your knowledge, and you can answer this later, how does that compare with other similar, mid-sized cities like Eugene and Oregon, Eugene, Salem, even Hillsborough? How does that percentage?
In terms of a percentage of the revenue for parks,
percentage of
the size of the SDC?
Not the size of the SDC, but the percentage of the the total capital improvement that is paid by SDCs as compared to the rest of the...
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but we can...
That's fine, and I don't need the answer now, just for the future.
Is that it?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Ortiz?
So I have questions on transportation. In your book, page, goodness gracious, 186, and then there's also a question about 193, both Blair and Van Buren Avenue Transportation Corridor. So in this document, it says project status not started, and then it says application for federal transportation enhancement grant has been submitted, but then it says new project, FY 2012-17 CIP. So some of the projects in here have that statement, and then some of them have projects. So can you tell, grant applications that are associated with this. So can you tell me the difference, and how do we get, like, for instance, the Blair and Van Buren Active Transportation Corridor to go to the CIP, and then also, to the new CIP, and then the Jepson Path? Those are two things that have both of those comments on there. Is it an either-or way of funding, or are they going to go on the CIP, and then if there is grant money, then you'll use that, but otherwise it's a for sure that they're going to be done?
No, they're dependent on grant funding, and ODOT now is soliciting public comments on the transportation enhancement project applications that have been submitted statewide. We know that Blair and Van Buren, they've screened that out and said they didn't meet the criteria for that type of funding, so that project won't be funded. So we started, when we put the draft CIP together, and we had applications in the mix but didn't know the status. We still don't know the status. I think we'll know before the capital budget is adopted for fiscal year 12.
Okay.
So we'll know whether the Jessen Path, and I think there's one other, I think it's the Westmoreland Path, whether those are successful grant applications or not.
So you will know before you put the final out, and...
Well, not before the final 6-year CIP, but before the capital budget is adopted.
For this year. Okay, so I guess I'm just trying to find clarification on how we're going to get Blair and Van Buren fixed, and then also make sure that the bike path happens in, over on the west side. I understand you're saying you're applying for grants, but if they're not funded, some of these things, funding not identified in this document, and then other ones, funding secured or identified. So how do we move those two projects up? Or are they just going to be moved up as these other ones are secured and done?
Well, we submit projects every time there's a grant opportunity, whether it's the Transportation Enhancement Grant or the ODOT Bike PED Grant, and some are successful, and sometimes the criteria change or the focus of the Oregon Transportation Commission changes. So we try to submit projects that best match the criteria. And we don't have another viable funding source for those types of projects.
Okay, so if, for instance, Blair and Van Buren wanted their road, Blair needed to be repaved, we would need to do a CIP to get that done, is that correct? LID, excuse me, thank you.
Right, and a local improvement district could be one funding mechanism. Community development block grants could be a funding mechanism. So there's different ways to do it. We pursued it via a grant project.
Maybe on the
This
next
time, yeah.
bond project. Leftover bond
Right.
money.
Yeah, for the curb-to-curb piece of it.
Thank you.
I've got John and then Councilor Clark.
So we retermed traffic calming into neighborhood livability, and I like the way that you put that it can be more than roundy rounds or lumpty dumps.
I don't remember him saying that.
I don't remember him saying
We're into my time here. My concern with that is that we have $30,000 allocated to that, funded, and we have $70,000 of it funded, not identified. It's on 2 different pages. And it's been that way for the last 10 years at least. Now we're folding more category. Before it was traffic calming. Okay, and counselors around this table, Pat, I'm sorry, not here, but there are needs in every ward of the city for traffic calming and neighborhood livability. So now what we've done is we've added more things, such as maybe a ramp, or maybe some of the other things that you mentioned.
Sidewalk infill.
But we have not increased the funding at all. So, again, this is not necessarily, it's identified in the CIP. It rises to the surface in the CIP, but I think it's something that the city manager should take note of when presenting his budget, that, okay, rather than just going status quo on traffic calming, know that a lot more things have gotten folded into that besides traffic calming, and so there may be an increased need for funding to that program. Because, I mean, everybody around the table has constituents that are coming to them and saying, gosh, can you do something about this street? They just go barreling down it. Or, you know, we need a little bit of sidewalk in this section, or this or that. And we haven't, even inflation, we haven't increased for inflation in the last 10 years. So,
Point well taken. One of the things I think Kurt and his team have done a great job over the last year is really getting the transportation dollars into a place in which we actually feel like we got our head a little bit above water. The next step eventually is going to be getting more of our head above water, because I know, for example, Kurt has a real interest in sidewalk infill kind of a project, and it's really desperately needed. But there isn't necessarily additional dollars to continue to fund those kinds of things. So I agree with you. As we go down the road, we want to keep being conscious of those kinds of things. But
Councilor Clark?
My question is one that could get too wide a discussion here, so I want to try and keep it as focused as I can. SDCs predominantly are calculated based on a short time window of, what, the 5-year or 6-year CIP predominantly. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
No, they're all based on the master plans, which are typically a 20-year horizon. Yeah.
Right. Has it always been the case that we look at a 20-year horizon?
To my knowledge, both here and other places I've worked, that's been the way it's been done, with the exception in that before the last legislative session, our transportation system is still based upon a level of service rather than a project list. With the last legislature, all SDCs have to be based on a project list. So next time we update transportation, that'll be based upon a project list.
And what happens when someone, because the SDCs are collected now, and the project list has the 20-year horizon, what happens when a project falls off the project list for whatever reason and doesn't actually get built? Do the SDCs then get refunded in that case?
No, they don't get refunded, but we periodically update the methodology in the project list, so it's not that we do it once and then wait 20 years and finish all the projects. We change it as conditions change. So projects could be, so for example, as we complete the pedestrian and bicycle master plan, I imagine that the list of SDC eligible transportation project is going to grow quite a bit based upon bicycle and pedestrian projects.
Would you say there's a fair nexus between what people get charged when they're creating more demand on the system and what gets built in the course of time that those people would get to actually use?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the legal piece, and then John can give you the philosophical piece. But
Okay.
I mean, the legislature has SDCs. Every time we go through a legislative session and SDCs are talked about, it gets more and more prescriptive to do exactly what you said, is to make sure that you're only charging for the capacity that new development is demanding, and that you spend the money on the projects that bring that capacity to fruition.
I'll just put in the context of Envision Eugene, one of the things that will be coming to this group is, one of the recommendations that I will bring is doing an assessment on variable SDCs, and essentially what that means is probably even a little bit more refinement around some of that nexus, and are there parts of the city in which an SDC amount may be different because some of the capital facilities are already present as opposed to someplace else. So, and that will have some benefits in a variety of ways, but that will be one of the things that will be coming to the council as a recommendation that's coming out of Envision Eugene.
Okay, thanks.
Mary Ann, back to you.
Yes, on SDCs, quick question. Schools are not included in that in any way, because they do a large development and change the school picture. They're a separate district. Is there any coordination with SDC charges in schools? For example, if a school has to be built, there's all kinds of, other problems, transportation. Is there any planning around education, and is that just sort of a whole separate thing, it isn't related?
Those SDCs are equal opportunity. They're charged to any type of development. Schools, nonprofits.
Oh, the school districts pay their own, the CDC, SDC comes out of the school district pot?
Do the school districts charge an SDC to development? Is there a school SDC?
Oh, there's it's not a SDC, but there's a development charge, and I believe Bethel charges it and 4J doesn't. And I don't know the particulars of it, but I think
And then the charges we took care of. Oh, yes, Alder. Now, speaking as a citizen who has driven through Alder for 40 years, I can't imagine how they're going to do a double bike line in this very narrow lane. You would have to either cut off houses on the one side or cut off access into the university education and music building parking. And I don't see that plan visually as at all workable. I guess the money's there for it, it's secured. And is there anybody have any information on the real, we have a saying goes us with the university, don't hit a student too hard. Because they never look where they're going. Bikes are a little better, but bikes do run into pedestrians and the bikes and cars. This is a little narrow street. Anybody know anything about that, or how can you find out?
yeah, right now on Alder between
13th
and 18th, there are two bike lanes. They're on opposite sides of the street. So it's a contraflow bike lane. One goes northbound, one goes southbound. So this project is...
Never anyone on that other, on the southbound street.
I ride it all the time.
There's never anyone coming that way. So why are we saying that we have to make it two-way if it's already got two ways?
Well, the project also extends the facility from 13th down to Franklin, includes a crossing of Franklin. And then the idea of moving the contraflow bike lanes to both to the same side of the street is to reduce the number of conflicts between cars that are crossing at intersections and cyclists and the pedestrians and cyclists.
So both sides are going to be on the same side. So there really isn't going to be any diminishing of the driving space.
That's correct.
That would probably be a lot better, because bicycles, as it is now, bicycles, pedestrians, and cars are all running into each other. Have been for quite a few years.
Well, sounds like this will help with that.
This will help. Because there's never anyone going that way, going away from the university. It's mostly in traffic. I don't know what they do when they leave, but they don't go back that way. I'm very observant of that road because I've driven it so many times.
Ramin?
No, it's 2.
You're up.
Yeah. Do I need a push button?
We can hear you.
Hi. Just looking at it from looking at the report, I see some projects are secured, some identified financing, and some unidentified. And I'm guessing these are coming out of individual reports, needs assessment, and so forth, that brews up to become a project that needs to be undertaken. I was wondering, when you get these reports, do they have any risk associated to it? That means if you don't undertake this project, what is the risk of not? Because if you have $10 and you have $20 on a table in project, some process has already taken that it's identified, maybe grants or others. Then you have other projects that are in a limbo, right? And so from a from a scarce resources point of view, a category of risk, I know, or prioritizing would help, from a citizen, people sitting around the table, to identify, okay, this is top priority. Otherwise, it's just bunch of, here you are, yeah? So, and from effectiveness of the citizen will be very limited. Because I'm no engineer, right? And looking at all these projects, it's just going to be not very effective. It's hit and miss. So it's just from a report generation or communication side.
Okay. So that is part of that process. And so, for example, on pavement preservation, the council in the past has given us the direction to both from the council and then in the trans plan is that we focus on preservation of the existing system before adding capacity. And so that's kind of the policy direction from both the city council and then through our pavement management system, is that we focus to preserve the existing system, because on pavements, if you don't maintain it, it gets much more. It's not a linear degradation curve. It's more sharp. That if you don't maintain what you have and you have to reconstruct it, it can be upwards of 5 times more expensive than maintaining it. So that's one example, and I think that probably with all of the systems we go through a similar risk analysis.
So would I then take it that all of this is top priority?
Yeah, that's what
is it all red alarm, red light in terms of needs assessment that needs to be undertaken that are here?
No, I think it's a choice on the pavement preservation. Is there's a financial impact if you don't that you don't do it. And earlier we talked about the Jessen path. That's one that. It'd be nice. It'd create a more walkable and bikeable community in that part of the city, but it's not. I wouldn't say it is a red light project. It's more a way to build neighborhood livability and to increase options for alternative modes.
So we are at the point where we are scheduled to take a break. Sounds like people are ready for one, and then I'm hoping we can wrap up our comments and questions quickly when we come back. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene about 10 after. And I'll come round you up if you're not here.
Is this a motion? Or are there specifics that you want to pull out? Is there something, what's the process from here, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yes.
A motion to recommend.
That would be correct. if we are finished with discussion and questions, though I think
Well, we can move it.
we might have at least one more round from John.
And another point, I was talking to John during the break, people around this table can go through and say if there's a project in here somewhere that thinks should be reprioritized or moved, they can throw that as an amendment to this, and then if it passes, then it's voted on as amended, only as a recommendation to the city council, and that the city council takes that into consideration, although there's no guarantee that we will or may not support that recommendation. That is a way to...
Thank you for that information, Councilor Pauling. That's really helpful. So I believe John is in the queue to speak, and if anyone else has more questions or comments, we do have some time.
Well, I guess the only thing that I'm going to say, and it's a broken record, but this is my last time commenting on a CIP as a budget committee member,
That sounds ominous.
Is that Councilor Borofsky?
No. Is the deferred maintenance on the buildings and the infrastructure. I really feel that the city is heading down a dangerous path here with the amount of deferred maintenance that we're doing with our buildings. And I was talking to Councilor Pryor over the break, and it's always easiest when you get into hard budget times to not, to defer the maintenance or not buy the police car or not buy the fire truck. And that's a short-term savings, but a lot of times, as we've seen, especially with the road fund, it's a very large long-term liability. And the reason it's easier, I won't say easy, but easier to do that is because there's not an advocate for a new roof, other than perhaps the staff that is trying to get it funded. It doesn't affect the people. There's not a group of parents that are coming and saying, fix that roof, fix that roof, fix that roof. And so I feel it's my position as a citizen member of the Budget Committee to be that advocate, to say, hey, if we keep doing this, a lot of our buildings are going to end up in the position that this building is in here. And that may be okay for some buildings, but there's going to be buildings that we could continue on for another 10, 15, 20 years if we threw the right amount of money at them. And if we're not, they're going to be beyond repair, and we're going to have to go to the citizens and say, we need this building replaced rather than we need a new heat pump for this building. So that's my advocacy for new roofs.
Any other discussion? Marianne?
Well, I completely agree with John. I have some printed copies of my comments, which are along the line that John and Ramin have said, is that no matter how we describe in these various words, preservation, enhancement, maintenance, such, it looks like we've got a lot of very fluid terms. And when we want to do something, we find a way to call it something which it may not be. And regular maintenance seems to be kind of looked over. I won't get into my city hall thing because I think that's a big one that many people do have spokesmen for. We haven't dealt with that at all. We've taken it off the placeholder thing. I don't know what good or not good that did. But I feel like it's build it, and they'll come, and they don't come. And that was a movie, that was a fiction. And we have all these parking garages not used. That's just one small example. We have a city hall, which I was assured would cost more. It looks like the seismic refit it's going to cost $6 million over there at Country Club. So I feel we're on the wrong path. And I had thought we had begun to put something in a regular budget that would have a plan to keep up, to do upkeep that needs to be done, and not let it deteriorate. but I guess that's not really assured. So I have that same sense of we're voting because the economy is picking up a little bit, but I see the effect of even the previous recession lasting quite a bit longer. And, if you don't repair the roof, eventually you have to take the house down sometime. And so that's my view. I agree with the comments made by John and about this.
All right.
And anybody who would like some copies, if you didn't get them on email of my comments, would have them.
And the budget staff distributed copies of your comments to everyone.
To the council people, yes.
Yep.
Okay. Any staff member that didn't get this commentary audience, I made extra copies, so I don't have to go on about it.
So the chair would entertain a motion.
So moved? Or seconded? Which one?
And this is a motion to recommend the draft CIP to the city council.
Terry moved and I seconded.
Okay.
Okay, who's going to call the question?
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Opposition.
Opposition.
One opposed? Any abstentions?
I would like to abstain.
And Mary Ann abstains.
No, she can't.
She can't abstain?
She can.
She can't.
Oh, city councilors have to vote one way or the other? All right. So before we adjourn, I do have a couple of announcements. The staff at the city manager's office is currently recruiting for boards and commission members, and beginning in June, there will actually be 4 openings on this budget committee for citizen members. Terms are ending for Mary Ann, Terry McDonald, and Ramin.
And me.
Well, I know John's not listed on here, and he's under the impression that he's leaving.
We changed that.
We have membership for life from Mr.
This is my 6th year. 4th. That would be the 4th. That would be the 4th. Mary Ann.
Well, no, then the other absence is a current absence, which is Joe
my wife's gonna kill me.
Patwara, who moved outside of the city limits and so cannot
Total
serve.
5 positions there.
So can we double check on John's status? So this, the city does engage in a recruitment process, but if you know folks who you think might be interested in serving, please speak with the finance staff or the budget committee staff and encourage folks to apply. There's an application process and an interview, and my understanding is that city council votes on membership to this committee. And then the other announcement is just a reminder that the meeting we had scheduled for February 16th has been rescheduled. This is for the general fund forecast. It's just a 1-hour meeting. I understand that a couple of councilors are unable to attend, which is unfortunate, but it's been rescheduled to March 9th at 5:30, and I think the location is still to be determined. So we'll be meeting here on March 9th from 5:30 to 6:30.
That was a replacement for which meeting?
The February 16th meeting has been changed.
To clarify, I think some of those budget committee members whose terms are expiring are eligible for another term if they want to apply.
That I believe that is correct.
They do have to apply again, but...
Okay. Thank you. That's good to know. Any last comments or before we adjourn? Thanks very much, everyone, for a great, efficient meeting. I really appreciate it. We are adjourned.
Thank you.